Chicago, 1893. The air smelled of coal, perfume, and possibility. From miles away, the newly built White City shimmered like a promise, a city made of light itself. Visitors came by train, by carriage, and on foot, drawn to the world's Columbian exposition that everyone said would define the future. But every bright future casts a shadow. Among the crowd that April morning stood a man in a pale grey coat, his eyes fixed not on the fair's electric towers, but on the district that sprawled beyond a quieter stretch of brick and soot called Englewood. There, between tailor shops and bakeries, a new hotel was being finished. Its architect, Samuel Halden, was only 27. The newspapers called him the young visionary of the West Side. They said his building would welcome hundreds of fairgoers with elegance and comfort. Yet those who had worked for him whispered that the place was strange inside a maze of rooms that led nowhere, stairs that ended in walls, corridors that looped upon themselves like a trick of the eye. Still, Chicago adored ambition, and Samuel smiled for the photographers, insisting that the city's glory would live within his design. He unlocked the front door that morning with theatrical calm. "Every structure," he told a passing reporter, "is a confession written in brick." That night, the White City glittered. Bands played waltzes beside Lake Michigan, and fireworks crowned the sky. Guests from St. Louis, Boston, and even London checked into the Halden Hotel. By dawn, one of them was missing. A chambermaid swore she'd seen the woman enter her room at 11:30 p.m. The door never opened again. The clerk, tired and blinking, shrugged. Perhaps she left early for the fair. But in the morning light, a bellhop noticed something unsettling. On the lobby register, beside the woman's name, the ink had been carefully scratched out, not smudged, not crossed through, but removed with acid, as if she had never existed at all. The story continues the following afternoon. Beneath a slate-grey sky heavy with rain, the Chicago Tribune newsroom hummed like an overworked hive, typewriters clattering, ink smearing, editors shouting over the hiss of gas lamps. Eleanor Shaw, 29, leaned against her desk, flipping through a telegram stamped Cook County Police Department. It read only 3 lines. Young female visitor, unaccounted for. Last seen Halden Hotel, Englewood District. Investigation closed for lack of evidence. She frowned. Closed? A missing person in a brand new hotel should have been headline material, but something about the case had gone silent overnight. No follow-up notes, no official report, only whispers among reporters about city pressure and business interests tied to the fair. Eleanor had made her name writing about the unseen corners of Chicago, the tenements, the factory fires, the quiet injustices nobody printed. She wasn't about to ignore this one. She packed her leather notebook, removed the silver press badge from her lapel, and replaced it with a small cameo brooch. Disguised as a provincial schoolteacher visiting the exposition, she rented a room under the name Mrs. Ellen Hayes. The cab ride south took her past the bright boulevards of the White City into the soot-choked streets of Englewood. The Halden Hotel rose before her like a monument built too soon. Dark red brick, trimmed with pale limestone, every window the same, every curtain drawn. The lobby smelled faintly of polish and something older, like rain trapped in the walls. A thin clerk greeted her with a mechanical smile. "Welcome, madam. Are you here for the fair?" She nodded, keeping her voice light. "And for a bit of quiet, if your house allows it." "Quiet," the man echoed, glancing toward the grand staircase. "Indeed, we value discretion above all." As Eleanor signed the register, she noticed the faint burn mark on the page, an erased line between room 213 and 215. The acid scars were still visible under the lamplight. Her room, on the second floor, was colder than it should have been. The wallpaper was a soft cream with vines, yet somewhere behind it, she thought she heard a hollow resonance, as if another space waited beyond the wall. That night, thunder rolled across the city. Downstairs, the clerk extinguished the lamps one by one. From her bed, Eleanor watched shadows slide beneath the door, steady and deliberate, until they vanished toward the corridor. When she rose to follow, the hallway was silent, too silent, and the air smelled faintly of iron and dust. She wrote in her notebook, noises in the walls, missing woman's name removed. Tomorrow explore further, and with that final line, she blew out the candle. By morning, the rain had passed, leaving the city wrapped in a pale, restless fog. Eleanor woke early, her head filled with the muffled echoes of footsteps or perhaps dreams. The room seemed smaller in daylight, as though the walls had drawn in during the night. She stepped into the corridor. The carpet, a dull maroon with a repeating floral pattern, stretched in both directions. She counted 12 doors on her left, 11 on her right. When she turned the corner, she expected to see the staircase descending to the lobby. Instead, the hallway bent sharply and continued forward again. She frowned, tracing her way back, but the corridor refused to behave. The angle was wrong, the spacing unfamiliar. Her door, room 214, had disappeared. "Excuse me," she called softly. A maid pushing a linen cart paused, her eyes wary. "Yes, miss. I can't seem to find my room." The maid hesitated. "It happens," she said. "The house confuses people sometimes." Eleanor managed a polite smile. "Does it confuse you as well?" The maid's silence said enough. Later that day, she descended to the lobby, pretending to admire the architectural details. Each corner boasted identical moldings, ornate cherubs, holding lanterns that never quite reached full brightness. The air smelled of varnish and faint mildew. A voice startled her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Samuel Halden himself stood behind her, tall, precise, his eyes grey as the lake. He wore the same pale coat from the newspaper photograph. "It's remarkable," she said carefully. "The corridors feel almost alive." He smiled, tilting his head. "A building should breathe with its occupants, otherwise it's just stone." "Does that explain the vanishing doorways?" she asked, testing him. "Ah," he said softly. "Some passages are meant only for those who listen closely enough." Their gazes met hers, curious, his unreadable. That evening, she marked her path on a scrap of paper. 12 steps, turn right, 15 more, left again. Yet when she retraced them later, the hall ended at a blank wall. Behind it, faintly, came a rhythmic tapping, slow, deliberate, metallic. She pressed her ear to the plaster. The sound stopped. The next instant, she felt a rush of cold air, as if something behind the wall had just exhaled. She stumbled back, heart pounding. The wallpaper rippled gently, though no window was open. That night, in her notes, she wrote, "This house changes shape when unobserved. There are more rooms than appear. Some doors are for the living, others, perhaps not." Outside, a train whistle moaned through the fog. Inside, the hallway answered with a sigh. The next afternoon brought a thin, yellow sunlight that turned the hotel's dusty windows into mirrors. Eleanor lingered by the staircase, pretending to admire a portrait of a faceless woman in a lace gown. Her real attention, however, was fixed on a group of laborers exiting a side corridor, 2 older men in patched coats, their hands rough from plaster and paint. She approached one of them outside, offering a cigarette and an easy smile. "You've worked here long," the man squinted at her. "Suspicious. Long enough to wish I hadn't." "You a guest or inspector?" "Just curious," she said. "The corridors seem peculiar." He gave a dry laugh. "Peculiar's one word for it. We built walls we weren't allowed to measure, doors we sealed without knowing what was behind them. Every week, Mr. Halden changed the plans." "Why?" "Improvement," he said. "But I tell you, no one ever saw a full set of drawings. Each of us only got 1 page. Like he didn't want anyone to see the whole picture." Before Eleanor could ask more, the man tipped his cap and hurried off. That evening, she found herself alone in the parlor, the clock ticking softly under the gaslight. From behind the counter, the clerk had left a stack of ledgers and papers. One sheet, half burned at the corner, bore the stamp Halden & Co. Architectural Office. She slipped it into her notebook and climbed the stairs to her room. Under lamplight, she studied the page. The lines were precise, almost delicate, marked with small notes in faded graphite. Air vent, observation chamber, vertical chute. And there, drawn faintly in pencil, a thin corridor curved behind the numbered rooms ending in nothing. Her pulse quickened. She flipped the sheet and noticed faint indentations from another page, as though someone had pressed hard while writing. Holding it near the flame, the letters surfaced in brown smoke lines. "Silence above all. The design will contain what the city must never see." A sound from the hallway made her jump the slow creak of the floorboards. She slid the blueprint beneath her pillow. The footsteps stopped outside her door, paused, and moved on. Unable to sleep, she returned to the drawing. The dotted lines between the floors formed a pattern she hadn't noticed before, a spiral, turning inward. It was not a hotel at all. It was a structure built to lead people downward. In the morning, she sought the foreman's shed behind the hotel, a small structure littered with paint tins and sawdust. She found more fragments, rolled parchments, scraps of copied plans. One piece showed the basement level, narrow tunnels marked only by initials. As she pieced them together, she realized each fragment aligned perfectly, forming what looked like the outline of a human body. The entire building shaped in rough resemblance to a man lying prone, his heart aligned exactly where the furnace room would be. The breeze rustled the papers like a whisper, and from deep inside the hotel, a bell rang once, soft, hollow, like a summons. The following night arrived with an amber haze over the city, the kind of uneasy stillness that falls before a storm. The Halden Hotel seemed quieter than usual. Even the faint hum of the pipes had gone still, as if the entire building were holding its breath. Eleanor sat alone in the dining room, pretending to read a guidebook. The waiter had vanished, the clerk nowhere to be seen. She was about to return to her room when a boy in a dark waistcoat appeared at the doorway. Barely 16, thin and pale, his uniform sleeves were too long for his arms. "Pardon me, ma'am," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "You asked about the blueprints yesterday?" Eleanor's heart stilled. "Yes," she said softly. "You work for Mr. Halden, don't you?" The boy nodded. I shouldn't speak to guests, but I've seen things. The others pretend not to notice, but I know what I've seen." He motioned for her to follow. They slipped into the service corridor behind the kitchen, where the gaslight was dim and the walls smelled of soot. The boy's voice trembled. "There's a room that doesn't stay where it's built," he said. "Mr. Halden calls it his study, but it's different every time. Sometimes it's on the second floor, sometimes the third. The doors change, even the number plates." Eleanor leaned closer. "What happens inside?" He swallowed hard. "People go in, but no one's ever opened it twice. The key won't fit again. Like the lock forgets you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old brass key, its surface corroded, the bow bent like a twisted ring. "I kept this from when the painter disappeared. He'd left it in his apron. It opens the door sometimes." Eleanor took the key gently. "Why tell me?" "Because I think she's still there. The lady that's missing. You can hear her sometimes, when the furnace goes quiet." Before she could respond, a floorboard creaked above them. The boy stiffened. From the end of the corridor came the echo of deliberate footsteps, descending the back stairs, steady, measured, and unhurried. "It's him," the boy whispered. "Mr. Halden. He walks at night when the walls move." They hurried back through the kitchen, where the single lamp flickered. By the time they reached the lobby, the sound had faded. The boy stopped at the base of the staircase. "If he asks," he murmured, "say, you've never met me." Eleanor turned to thank him, but he was already gone, vanished into one of the many identical doors that lined the hall. That night, she sat by her window, turning the key between her fingers. In the moonlight, faint letters glimmered along its edge, engraved words she could barely make out. "Room with no windows." She held it tightly, the metal cold against her palm, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow night." The storm that had been threatening for days finally broke after midnight. Rain lashed against the tall windows, thunder shuddered through the walls, and lightning illuminated the corridors in brief, ghostly flashes. Eleanor waited until the hotel had gone completely still. From her desk drawer, she took out the brass key and wrapped it in a handkerchief to muffle the sound. The clock struck 1. She slipped barefoot into the hallway. The lamps burned low, casting long, uneven shadows across the walls. The carpet was damp beneath her toes, perhaps from the leaking roof, or perhaps from something else. The corridor seemed longer tonight. She counted her steps. 12, then 15, then 20. When she reached the far corner, she found a narrow door she hadn't noticed before. Its paint was darker than the others, its handle colder. The key fit perfectly. The lock turned with a faint sigh, like a lung drawing air for the first time in years. Inside was blackness. No furniture, no window, no air moving. Just the sound of rain, muffled by metal walls. She held up her candle. The flame barely held. The air felt heavy, close. The walls weren't plaster. They were sheets of iron, bolted together, with rivets the size of coins. At the center of the floor was a small iron grate, its bars wet with condensation. Eleanor knelt, touching the edge. The metal vibrated faintly, as though machinery hummed somewhere below. Then a click. The grate shifted beneath her palm. She froze. It was attached to a pulley system, connected to the wall by thin steel cables disappearing through the floor. And the faintest draft, warm and dry, drifted upward from the darkness beneath. She leaned closer. Somewhere far below, something moved. The flame trembled violently. A gust of air rose through the grate, then stopped. She straightened quickly, her heart pounding. On the far wall, she noticed an outline faint, almost invisible, the shape of a door, but seamless, without hinges. And there, in the iron surface, something else. Faint fingerprints pressed into the soot. They were small, too small to be her own. She stumbled back toward the exit, but the handle refused to move. She tried again, harder this time. Nothing. A sound came from inside the walls, slow, metallic creaking. The entire room shuddered once, as if settling into place. Then, the floor beneath her feet tilted slightly. She braced herself against the wall, candle shaking. Somewhere beneath her, gears turned. A hollow space shifted, as though the entire chamber were descending into the earth. "Stop," she whispered, though no one could hear. The flame went out. Darkness swallowed everything, and just when she thought the walls might close in completely, the door behind her burst open. Strong hands pulled her out into the hallway. The bellboy, Thomas, stood there, drenched from the rain, his face pale. "You shouldn't have gone in," he gasped. "He knows when the door moves." Behind them, the metal room sealed shut again noiselessly. Rain still whispered against the hotel roof. A steady, sorrowful rhythm. Eleanor sat awake till dawn, shaking and pale, the brass key now dull and cold beside her. She kept seeing the soot-covered fingerprints, the cables vanishing into darkness, the room that had moved beneath her feet. When morning came, the city seemed unnaturally bright. The gas lamps hissed as they were extinguished, and the white city's glow returned beyond the windows. Yet inside the Halden Hotel, the air felt heavier than ever, as if the walls had absorbed the storm. She needed to understand who Samuel Halden truly was. At the public library near Dearborn Street, Eleanor requested old issues of the Englewood Courier and county records. The clerk frowned when she mentioned the architect's name, but fetched a thin folder nonetheless. Inside, birth certificate, apprenticeship notes, a few yellowed newspaper clippings. The first clipping, dated 1875, read, "Local undertaker's son excels in mechanical drawing. Young Halden shows promise in mortuary design." Mortuary design. She paused. The second clipping, more recent, reported the death of his father, Jonas Halden, owner of a small funeral parlor. Cause, asphyxiation from fumes, believed accidental. The article added that the boy, then 17, had discovered his father's body and calmly prepared it for viewing before authorities arrived. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Further in the file, she found correspondence between Samuel and the State Academy of Architecture letters, written in an elegant, controlled hand. One line stood out: "I have learned that permanence can be engineered, not prayed for." As she read, a memory from the previous night returned, the steady hum beneath the iron room, the sense of machinery that never slept. She asked the clerk for any record of his mother. The woman shook her head. No death certificate. Some say she disappeared when the boy was 15. Disappeared. Eleanor left the library unsettled. The streets were slick with rain, the city already awake with the noise of horses and trams. She returned to the hotel and found Halden standing in the lobby, speaking to a man in a black coat, perhaps an investor, perhaps something else. He turned as she entered. "Mrs. Hayes," he said pleasantly. "Did you enjoy your walk?" She forced a smile. "The city's history fascinates me." "Ah," he replied, eyes gleaming faintly. "History is only useful if we preserve it correctly." That evening, alone in her room, she dreamt. In her dream, she was a child, standing in a long corridor lined with mirrors. A voice whispered from the end, calm, paternal. Do you know what makes something eternal, Eleanor? She turned. The mirrors showed not her face but Samuel's younger, frightened, watching as unseen hands closed the lid of a coffin. To last forever, the voice said. You must first stop changing. She woke before dawn, breathless. Somewhere deep below the hotel, a furnace door clanged shut. The morning began with the rumble of wagons outside the Halden Hotel and the faint murmur of curious onlookers. A dark carriage had stopped before the main doors, its wheels still wet with rain. From it stepped Detective Frank Doyle, a man whose presence carried the weight of years spent among the city's shadows. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a dark overcoat buttoned high against the chill. His expression was weary but sharp, the look of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by human behavior, yet still searched for a trace of truth within it. The hotel clerk stiffened as Doyle approached the counter. I'd like to see your register, Doyle said. His voice was low, almost polite. The clerk hesitated. This is a private establishment, sir. Not when 2 guests go missing in less than a month. Doyle's gaze cut through him. Bring the book. With trembling hands, the man obeyed. Doyle flipped through the pages slowly. Each entry was written in the same neat ink until halfway down, where the writing broke off, replaced by uneven scratches and faint stains. He looked closer. The names of several guests had been erased, not crossed out, but chemically burned away, leaving smooth gaps in the paper. How long has your employer operated this place? Since April, sir. Everything by the law. Doyle closed the book and smiled thinly. I'll let you know when the law agrees. Upstairs, Eleanor watched from the landing, heart pounding. She hadn't expected the police to arrive so soon, and though relief stirred in her chest, it was mixed with fear. Fear that the truth, once exposed, might swallow her too. That evening, Doyle visited her room under the pretense of routine questioning. He recognized her immediately. Miss Shaw, he said quietly once the door was closed. You're not as disguised as you think. Eleanor froze. You know who I am? I've read your articles. The tenement fire, the meatpacking scandal. He studied her for a moment. Tell me why you're here. She hesitated, then handed him the folded blueprints and the brass key. Because this building isn't what it pretends to be. I found these. And there's a room, no windows, no air, only steel. Doyle examined the key, running his thumb along its edge. You've done my work for me, he murmured. Stay in your room tonight. If anything happens, don't interfere. But Eleanor couldn't rest. From her window, she saw the detective moving through the courtyard with 2 uniformed officers, their lanterns swinging like restless stars. Inside, the hotel seemed to respond, the pipes groaning, the floors shifting as if in protest. A faint vibration hummed through the walls. Downstairs, Doyle followed the sound to a locked cellar door. Here, he ordered, and one officer forced it open with a crowbar. The air that rose was heavy with rust and heat. The lantern light flickered over descending stairs made of iron. God help us, one of the men muttered. Doyle descended first, his boots echoing in the hollow below. The stairs opened into a long corridor of brick, lined with narrow compartments. Some were empty, others not. He raised the lantern higher. The light fell on shapes sealed behind glass. Not bodies, not quite, but forms preserved in wax and resin, their faces blurred by time and heat. Each wore a small brass tag engraved with a number. Blueprints were right, Doyle whispered. The design goes below, and far at the corridor's end, a door creaked open on its own. A faint draft of hot air escaped, carrying with it the smell of burning oil and something else beneath it. Something older. The lantern's flame wavered as the furnace roared to life somewhere deep within the walls. The sound was too loud, too deliberate. It wasn't machinery malfunctioning. It was responding. Doyle motioned for the officers to retreat. Out, he barked, gripping the rail. Now, but before they could climb, a sharp hiss echoed through the passage. Thin jets of gas erupted from vents along the brick, followed by the sickening scent of kerosene. Back, one man shouted. But the air itself seemed to ignite. The tunnel flared orange, light swallowing shadow, and heat swept through like a living wave. Doyle stumbled upward, coughing, his coat aflame at the sleeve. The lantern fell and shattered, glass exploding across the floor. He tore the fabric free and hurled it aside. eyes burning from the smoke. Above them, alarms clanged bells hidden in the walls, their metallic cry rising through every floor. The hotel was waking. Eleanor burst from her room at the first sound. The hallway pulsed with shifting light, smoke bleeding under the doors. She covered her mouth with a scarf and called down the stairwell. "Detective Doyle," his voice rose faintly from below. "Get out." The furnace, he set it off. Through the haze, she saw movement. Halden himself, calm as ever, descending from the third-floor landing. His coat was buttoned, his expression serene, eyes reflecting the firelight like polished steel. "Mr. Halden," she cried. "People are still inside." He paused, watching her through the smoke. "The building is perfect now," he said quietly. "Every floor corrected." "Perfect?" Her voice broke. "You'll kill them." He tilted his head, almost kindly. "My dear, I never killed anyone. The city sent them here to be forgotten. I merely designed the forgetting." The ceiling above them groaned. Plaster fell like snow. Eleanor turned and ran toward the staircase. But the corridor split, literally split its middle section, collapsing into a vertical shaft of flame. The architecture itself was changing again, closing off escape routes. The walls turned inward, swallowing doors. From the basement, Doyle emerged through the smoke, one arm shielding his eyes. "This way," he shouted, grabbing her by the wrist. Together they stumbled toward a service passage at the far end of the hall. The floor trembled beneath their feet. A sound like grinding metal rose from below, a mechanism turning, devouring the structure it once supported. They reached the kitchen, where windows had shattered from the heat. Doyle kicked at the back door until the lock gave way. Cold rain poured through the opening, washing smoke from the air. "Go," he coughed. "Run." Eleanor hesitated, looking back once more. Through the flames, she saw Halden standing on the landing, framed by fire and shadow. His lips moved, though she couldn't hear the words. Then the floor beneath him gave way. The sound that followed was not an explosion, but a sigh, deep, final, almost peaceful, as if the building itself were exhaling one last time. Outside, in the rain, Eleanor and Doyle collapsed on the cobblestones, the night sky glowing orange behind them. The Halden Hotel burned for hours. By dawn, only the brick facade remained, blackened and skeletal, its windows empty like blind eyes. When the flames finally died, the ground still smoldered. Doyle stood beside the ruin, silent. "We'll need to dig," he said at last. "Whatever's left is below." Eleanor nodded. Her hands were trembling. "He built a monument to his own madness," she whispered. "And now it's buried under its own weight." But Doyle shook his head. "No, Miss Shaw. You don't bury madness in this city, you just build over it." By the third morning after the fire, Chicago's newspapers had already christened it the Englewood Inferno. Reporters speculated about faulty wiring or gas leaks. Some claimed sabotage by rival investors. None dared print what the police had quietly discovered. Beneath the charred skeleton of the Halden Hotel, smoke still rose from fissures in the ground. The smell of wet ash hung heavy in the autumn air. Detective Doyle stood near the crater where the lobby once stood, a lantern in hand, his boots sinking into the soot. "Keep the crews back," he ordered. "We dig by hand from here." At his side, Eleanor Shaw adjusted her coat collar against the wind. She had insisted on returning despite the chief's protests. "You'll only get in the way," Doyle had warned her, but she had answered simply, "I need to see what he built." The first planks of flooring gave way with a dull crack, revealing a void beneath an iron stair spiraling downward into darkness. They descended slowly, lanterns flickering, the air growing warmer with each step. The walls here were blackened brick, but smooth, too deliberate for accident. Doyle's light caught on something metallic embedded in the wall. Rows of small brass plates, each engraved with a number. When they reached the bottom, the floor opened into a vaulted chamber, circular and immense. In the center stood the remnants of machinery, gears, belts, and great chains dangling from the ceiling like the ribs of a beast. Steam still hissed from ruptured pipes, whispering faintly through the gloom. Eleanor's eyes widened. "He built this entire place under the hotel." Doyle nodded grimly. "The blueprint spiral. It wasn't symbolic, it was structural." They advanced slowly. Against the far wall, several large glass cylinders stood intact despite the fire. Inside each was not a body, Not exactly, but something preserved, coated in wax and oil. Half-melted forms arranged almost reverently. Each figure seemed caught in mid-motion, like statues awaiting completion. Eleanor turned away, clutching her scarf. He called it preservation, she whispered. He meant it literally. On a metal table lay a thick ledger, the edges scorched but legible. Doyle flipped it open, pages filled with sketches and notes, organ diagrams, airflow systems, temperature readings. But one line, written over and over in the margin, caught his eye. To arrest decay is to master time. Eleanor's lantern light trembled across another object on the table, a bronze mask, molded to resemble a calm human face. Its eyes were hollow. Inside, tiny valves and wires coiled like veins. He wasn't just collecting, Doyle said softly. He was experimenting, trying to make something last forever. A sound echoed through the chamber, then soft, rhythmic, metallic. It came from the furnace shaft behind them, though no fire burned there now. The air stirred, faint but deliberate, like breath through a machine. Eleanor took a cautious step closer. "Do you hear that?" Doyle lifted his gun, scanning the darkness. The sound stopped. He exhaled. "We seal this place tonight," he said. "No one comes down again." But Eleanor lingered. Her lantern light swept once more across the brickwork, and she noticed something carved faintly into the arch above the door. The words were almost invisible beneath soot and soot-stained mortar. "Perfection is permanence." She stared at it a long moment, feeling the vibration of unseen gears humming faintly beneath her feet. When they emerged into daylight, she turned back one last time. The wind moaned through the wreckage above, and for a moment, she could have sworn she heard a low sigh rising from below, as if the house, even in ruin, still breathed. Winter descended early over Chicago. Snow covered the blackened ruins of Englewood, softening their edges, but never their memory. The fair had ended. The lights of the White City dimmed, its pavilions dismantled one by one. Yet the name Samuel Halden still filled every headline. They found him 2 weeks after the fire, walking calmly along the frozen shore of Lake Michigan, coat buttoned, hair perfectly combed. When the constables approached, he simply said, "I was waiting for the noise to stop." He offered no resistance. The trial began that December in the Cook County Courthouse. Crowds lined the streets, pushing against the iron gates, desperate for a glimpse of the man who had built death into architecture. Reporters called it the trial of the century. Women fainted in the gallery. Men cursed his name as he entered the chamber. Halden appeared almost serene. He greeted his attorney, adjusted his gloves, and took his seat as though attending an exhibition of his own work. The prosecutor's opening statement lasted an hour, enumerating the evidence. Blueprints, journals, bones found in the furnace room, chemical residues, and the testimonies of surviving workers. When his turn came, Halden rose. His voice was quiet, measured, and unnervingly clear. "You call it horror," he said. "I call it preservation. You build monuments for men who destroy cities, yet condemn a man who sought to perfect the form of endurance. My house was not a tomb. It was a cathedral to permanence." The courtroom erupted. The judge pounded the gavel for silence. The prosecutor asked, "Do you deny the deaths of those who entered your hotel?" Halden smiled faintly. "I deny their impermanence. What decays is lost. What I created endures." A murmur rippled through the gallery. One juror crossed himself. Eleanor Shaw sat among the reporters, her pen trembling. She had spent weeks preparing her account of the fire, the investigation, the blueprints, but nothing could capture the cold conviction in his voice. On the second day, Doyle testified. He described the vault, the machinery, the mask, the numbered plaques. "He didn't kill for pleasure," Doyle said flatly. "He killed to prove a theory that human bodies could be shaped into architecture, that death could be designed." Halden listened, unblinking. When the verdict was announced guilty but insane, he nodded slightly, as though satisfied. The judge ordered his confinement to the state hospital for the criminally insane at Kankakee. Reporters rushed the aisle, flashbulbs exploding like lightning. One shouted, "Do you regret anything, Mr. Halden?" Halden paused at the door, glancing back. "Only that the city refused to understand its own reflection," he said. "Every brick I laid was inspired by it." The guards led him away. Outside, Snow fell over the courthouse steps, silent and endless. Eleanor stood there long after the crowd dispersed, her notebook damp with melting flakes. Doyle approached quietly beside her. "It's over," he said. She shook her head. "No. He's exactly where he wanted to be, inside walls of his own design." The state hospital for the criminally insane stood 30 miles south of Chicago, surrounded by bare fields and frozen marshland. It was built of limestone and iron, severe and symmetrical, a place designed to contain what could not be understood. Samuel Halden arrived there on a grey January morning. He stepped from the carriage without resistance, pausing only to study the building's facade. "Efficient," he murmured to his guard, "but the symmetry is too eager to please." "I had." The orderlies led him down, echoing corridors that smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp paper. Inmates murmured behind iron doors, their voices blending with the distant hum of the boiler. The head physician, Dr. Adolphus Crane, recorded the first entry in his casebook that evening. Patient exhibits high intelligence, extreme composure, and no visible remorse. Displays architectural obsession. Claims confinement will refine his design. Within weeks, Halden had earned limited privileges. He spent hours in the hospital's workshop, sketching by the window with a stub of charcoal. Guards joked that he was redesigning the place, but they didn't see what he drew, not blueprints of walls or windows, but shapes that seemed to twist upon themselves, corridors turning inward like coiled snakes. Dr. Crane questioned him regularly. "Mr. Halden," he asked one afternoon, "what are these structures you keep drawing?" Halden smiled faintly. "They come to me in dreams. A continuation of the hotel, an improved version, a place where the air never escapes." "And who lives there?" "No one," he replied. "It houses memory itself." The doctor noted delusions of grandeur, but could not deny the precision of the work. Every angle obeyed mathematical logic, every curve measurable. The other patients began to whisper about the architect who could build houses in his sleep. By March, strange things began happening at night. Guards reported hearing footsteps in the unused West Wing, slow, measured, identical to the pattern Halden once walked through his hotel halls. The boiler room workers swore the pipes vibrated in odd rhythms whenever he drew. One night, Eleanor Shaw arrived at the hospital under a visitor's permit. She had argued for weeks to gain access, insisting it was for a follow-up article. Dr. Crane reluctantly agreed. They met in a small consultation room, 2 guards posted outside. Halden rose as she entered, smiling politely. "Miss Shaw," he said, "I wondered when the city would send its conscience to visit me." She sat opposite him, notebook in hand. "I'm not here to absolve you," she said, "only to understand." He gestured to the sketches spread before him, hundreds of pages covered in lines and spirals. "Understanding is the foundation of all creation. Look closely, and you'll see the pattern of the human heart. 4 chambers, each with its own echo." She scanned the drawings. Some resembled labyrinths, others almost human silhouettes stretched across grids of corridors. One bore a chilling note at the bottom. "Version 2 to be constructed from within." Eleanor looked up. "What does that mean?" Halden leaned closer. "When a mind is confined, Miss Shaw, it begins to shape its own architecture. This place thinks it holds me, but I am already rebuilding it." The guards shifted uneasily. Dr. Crane's later report summarized the visit. Patient articulate, displays fixation with recursive design, claims awareness of structural vibrations through walls. Staff report unease in patient's ward. Weeks passed. Then, one morning in April, an orderly discovered Halden's cell, empty, the lock unbroken, the window sealed from the inside. Only his sketches remained arranged across the floor in a perfect spiral. The search lasted 3 days. On the 4th, a nurse swore she heard faint tapping behind one of the plaster walls in the western corridor. When they broke it open, they found nothing but brick, and on it, written in charcoal, a single line: "The design continues." 4 years passed. The city moved on, as cities always do. The site of the Halden Hotel had been cleared, the land sold, and a new textile warehouse now stood in its place. Shiny brass letters above the entrance read, "Englewood Fabrics Co., though the workers often whispered that strange noises echoed through the floorboards after midnight. Eleanor Shaw had long since left daily reporting. She now wrote investigative essays for a small literary journal, her style more reflective, her subjects more haunted. The events of the Halden case had followed her like a phantom shadow. She could never quite escape. She had tried to forget the fire, the vault, the trial, the empty cell. Yet every night, as she drifted towards sleep, she would hear it. The slow rhythm of breath through unseen pipes, the faint murmur of shifting walls. That spring, urged by her editor, she returned to the story one last time. The result was a 50-page article titled "The Architect of Shadows." It opened not with Halden's crimes, but with a meditation on memory. Every city keeps its ghosts not in graves, but in structures in the corridors we no longer question, the rooms we never open. We call them buildings, but they are monuments to what we choose to forget. She described him not as a monster, but as a mirror, a man who built permanence into the transience of human ambition. Halden's genius was not in construction, but in reflection. He took the principles of the city itself, expansion, concealment, preservation, and turned them inward until they devoured their own foundation. The essay detailed the investigation with meticulous precision. The erased names, the blueprints, the sealed vault. She spared the public the worst of what she had seen, but her language carried the weight of what could not be printed. Doyle had since retired from the force. She sent him an early copy of the piece, along with a note. Perhaps it's time we stop chasing the monster and start asking who built the city that allowed him to thrive. He never replied, though she later heard he'd moved west, away from the soot and the memories. The article was published in the autumn of 1897. It caused a brief sensation, praised for its insight, condemned for its sympathy. Within weeks, the public's fascination with Halden faded once more beneath the noise of progress. But one evening, as Eleanor prepared her notes for a lecture on investigative ethics, she received a small parcel in the post. No return address. Inside was a folded sheet of heavy paper, a sketch in charcoal of a spiral-shaped building, eerily familiar. At the bottom, written in faint, careful handwriting, were the words, "To Miss Shaw, version complete." She sat frozen, the edges of the drawing smudging her fingertips. The next day, she traveled south to Kankakee to inquire about the hospital's condition. Dr. Crane had died the previous winter, and the institution had since closed several wings for renovation. One orderly, when asked about Halden, only shook his head. "No record," he said, as if he'd never been here. That night, Eleanor walked the empty streets of Englewood. The textile warehouse loomed against the moonlight, silent and pristine, yet beneath her feet, she thought she felt the faintest vibration, steady as a heartbeat. Summer of 1903. A new age had come to Chicago, steel rising higher than churches, electric rails threading through the streets like veins of light. The past, it seemed, was finally being buried beneath progress. The Englewood Fabrics Company had gone bankrupt that spring, and the city approved plans to demolish the old warehouse to make room for a modern bank. The announcement barely made the papers. Only a small notice on page 6 read, "Demolition to begin August 12. Site originally occupied by the Halden Hotel. When Eleanor saw the date, her breath caught. 10 years since the fire. 10 years since she had written The Architect of Shadows. She had promised herself never to return. And yet, when she heard the first strike of the demolition hammer echo across the southern wards, she found herself boarding a streetcar, heading toward Englewood once more. The air was hot and thick with dust. Workmen shouted over the clatter of collapsing beams. The warehouse walls groaned and fell inward, revealing layers of old brick beneath brick too dark, too ancient for any textile building. One of the foremen waved her back from the cordon. "Danger zone, ma'am. I used to cover this district," she called. "I only want to look." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just stay clear when we open the foundation." By late afternoon, most of the structure was gone. The workers began clearing debris from the lower level, uncovering what had once been the warehouse's basement. But as they shoveled deeper, their tools struck something solid metal, not stone. The foreman knelt, brushing away dirt. A circular plate of iron emerged, embossed with faint lettering, H & Co., 1893. "Old sewer cap?" one worker asked. The foreman frowned. "No, This isn't city work. They pried it open. A column of warm air rose from the darkness below. The smell was faintly chemical, like old oil. When the lanterns were lowered, they revealed a narrow staircase, descending into an untouched chamber of brick and riveted steel. Eleanor felt her knees weaken. "It's still here," she whispered. The men looked at her, confused. "I covered the fire," she said softly. "This shouldn't exist." She descended carefully, her gloved hand sliding along the rail. The air was heavy, motionless, but not dead. On the lower step, she stopped. The walls were covered with black soot, yet beneath it glimmered lines of fresh chalk, as if someone had been sketching there recently. Circular patterns, measurements, notes in fine handwriting. One worker held up his lantern, revealing a phrase scrawled across the far wall. "Every design must be revised." The foreman cursed under his breath. "Who's been down here? Kids?" But Eleanor knew that handwriting. Her throat tightened. In the corner lay a pile of folded papers, dry despite the year's architectural drawings sealed in oilskin. She unrolled one and gasped. It showed the layout of a new structure. Vast, coiling, precise. At the center was a single word: vault. The worker's hammer slipped from his hand, clanging against the floor. The echo seemed to go on too long, as though the chamber beneath them was much larger than it should have been. Then came a faint sound from below the iron plate, a whisper of moving air, rhythmic and deliberate, like the beating of a mechanical heart. Eleanor looked up toward the fading daylight. "Seal it," she said quickly. "Now." But even as the workers began replacing the cover, she could feel it, the low tremor of something vast and patient, still turning deep beneath the city. That night, as she walked home through the narrow streets, she passed a new building site, rising only blocks away. A bank, gleaming with marble columns and steel beams, and across its blueprints, pinned to a signpost for public view, she saw the architect's name written neatly at the bottom: S. Halden, Autumn 1910. Chicago's skyline shimmered beneath a pale evening sun, the lake beyond it calm as glass. The new Federal Trust Bank stood proudly on the corner of Wallace and 63rd gleaming white stone where, years before, soot and ruin had ruled. People called it a marvel of modern architecture, a symbol of stability in an age of progress. Inside, the marble floors reflected golden light from chandeliers, shaped like clockwork suns. No one who entered thought about what lay beneath. Eleanor Shaw, now in her 50s, sat on a bench across the street, notebook closed in her lap. The years had softened her face, but not her eyes. She had seen the city rebuild itself too many times, each layer covering the last, each promise of progress laid upon a quiet grave. She had not written about Samuel Halden since that day in the demolition pit. The sketches she had recovered were sealed away, unread. She had convinced herself that whatever she had glimpsed was simply her imagination, trauma, echoing against the stones of memory. But every few months, she returned to this corner. She listened. Sometimes, late in the afternoon, when the wind shifted off the lake, she could feel it, the faintest vibration underfoot, subtle but steady, as though the ground itself still breathed. That evening, as dusk settled, she watched the last workers leave the bank. A young architect exited last, carrying a roll of drawings beneath his arm. He paused at the steps to adjust his hat. When he turned slightly toward the fading light, Eleanor froze. He was perhaps 30, neatly dressed, his features unremarkable, save for one detail, the calm, measured expression she had seen only once before. He stopped, sensing her gaze, and offered a polite nod before walking away down the street. The wind lifted a corner of his plans, revealing the title scrawled in neat, slanted handwriting: Project Number 7, the substructure. Her breath caught. She rose, crossing the street, and pressed her palm against the cool stone of the bank's outer wall. For a moment, she felt nothing. Then deep within, the faintest echo answered. A distant pulse of air, like the slow, patient exhalation of something vast and hidden. A carriage rattled past, drowning the sound. When it was gone, the city was still again, serene, indifferent, alive. Eleanor turned toward the lake. The lights of the skyline flickered to life one by one, glittering like constellations reflected on water. Every structure is a confession written in brick, Halden had once said. Now, as she walked away, the city loomed behind her, its windows like unblinking eyes, its towers breathing in unison, a single organism of steel and memory. She thought she heard a low murmur rise from its depths, not words exactly, but a rhythm, the whisper of gears, the heartbeat of foundations. She did not turn back. The echo followed her until it was impossible to tell where her heartbeat ended and the city's began.